I tell you what I don't like. In some churches, they have a spotlight big enough for like 10 parking lots, and they shine it, and you can't see your Bible, you can't see the pulpit or nothing. I wonder what those pastors do all the time. They probably just got the sermon memorized, you know. But anyways, it's good to be here, and pray y'all had a good rest this afternoon, and I've had a busy summer so far, and last week I was over in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, did a revival all week, and then week before that I was in Rochester, Pennsylvania, and had 8 get saved, so that was good. And then I was at a camp before that in North Carolina, and had 9 get saved. You know, back in the old days, you'd see like 27, 30-some kids get saved at camps and things. But things are changing. Man, they're changing. And at that camp, they were down 100 kids. They only had 200 kids instead of 300. But everything's changing everywhere. And a lot of those vacation Bible schools, they done away with them because they have school in a lot of parts of our country in the summertime now. And some of them, like this county, has school this week and this one this week. So the kids don't know what to do. And then now everybody's competing with the sports, and somehow in the church, no matter what's preached, the sports come first, you know, before God, before before the preaching of the Word. Remember back in our days, you know, they didn't have sports and things on Sundays. In fact, in Pennsylvania where I grew up, you weren't even allowed to go hunting on Sundays because that was a Sunday. Well, I'm glad you're still able to go fishing, though, because as a Catholic boy, I get up early Saturday morning, get out there to crack of dawn, catch trout, then go to Mass on Sunday night, get it out of the way because it didn't mean nothing to you. And then Sunday morning, you had another Saturday morning to get up and go out to go trout fishing. So that's one advantage of being a Catholic. Boy, I wish I could have grew up and, you know, gone to some Christian camps and some churches and heard the gospel, but I couldn't do it. Mother wouldn't allow us. I couldn't even go on those church picnics, you know, that they had. And I did sneak out my buddies one time, and I'll never forget, man, you played softball and you ate all that food under the shelters, and you can go back there anytime you wanted to get more food or desserts. So I am playing ball, and then our team comes in up for bats, and I'd run up there, get a piece of pie, come down, and a couple innings later, I'd go up there and get some more dessert and come down. Well, I wasn't allowed to have all that dessert in a week at at home, and I said, boy, them Protestants, they're lucky. But that's the way things go. But it's good to get saved and be in a house of God, so hey, that last song kind of goes with my sermon about goodness and mercy following all the days of your life. So let's turn to Psalms 37. I'm just going to preach from one verse in verse 8. Psalm 34. Psalm 34. Oh, I better get this off, huh? Yeah, there's no glow-in-the-dark pictures on this one. And okay. Now down here in verse 8, just a simple verse, and David wrote this psalm, and it said, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him." And God is good, and he doesn't want you just to see about it or read about it or hear about it in Sunday school class. He wants you to taste that he's good. And how are you going to taste the goodness of God? How do you taste it? Think about it. Anybody got an idea? You guys. Oh, come on. There you go. Pardon? Spend time in his Word. Well, you're reading it there, but are you tasting it? I'll tell you how you taste it. After you're done reading his Word and you go on your way, minding your own business, the whole world falls apart. And then you start looking for the goodness of God and you find it. That's when you really taste it in the midst of your trials. Yeah. And David wrote this psalm uh, on the top, if you got one of those Bibles that got the captions of what it was all about, it's when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, and Abimelech, that's when he was being chased by Saul, and he got tired, and he says, I'm going to get out of Jerusalem or Saul won't chase me anymore. So he goes to the land of the Philistines, and of all things, he goes to and he didn't pray about it. He never prayed about it. That's it. You read about it. He said, I will do this, I will do that, I'm going to escape, I'm tired. And so everything he did, he said I. So he was out of the will of God. And then when he got over there, they said, hey, that's the guy that killed our champion, Goliath. And now he left the frying pan, and man, he was in the fire. And what a mess. And what a trying time. Don't you hate when you make stupid mistakes like that? Especially when you're younger. You guys are about the age now, you'll be making a lot of them. But my dad used to tell me, he says, don't worry about it. This is the time for you to learn the dumb things, so when you're a little older, you don't do it anymore. And so that made me feel a little better about all the dumb mistakes I was making. But that's just the way it works, I guess. But anyways, that's when he found himself in the city of Gath, and now he's under fire by those Philistines, the guy that killed our champion, and it's a trying time. Then he says, in the midst of all that, it doesn't make sense. He says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." And he's saying, "Blessed is the man that trusts in the Lord at all times." And we know you're blessed for trusting God, but taste and see that the Lord is good. So that's a little background about this psalm. Now David, when he wrote this, he was still a young man, and he's starting out there. I guess he was about 24 years old or so, and now he's got a reputation for being a giant killer, and then he gets into the army there, and Saul sends him out on expeditions and to fight the Philistines, and he's just all victorious, fighting them all off all the time, and so he becomes a great general, and then he gets to marry Saul's daughter, and married Michael, and now he's in the king's family, and then from there things just getting better, and then finally Saul, he gets jealous of David. There's always somebody got to be jealous of what you're doing in the Lord's work or whatever, and so they're always making trouble. So here he gets jealous of him, and finally he gets to a place where he accuses David of being of treason, and now he wants to kill him, and for the next 7 years or so, 7 years I think it was, he's on the run for his life. Every day David's running for his life, hiding in the dens and caves of En-Gedi. And I got to see En-Gedi. I got to go to Jerusalem one year. And boy, or Israel. And man, it was so exciting being in the Holy Land and seeing those things. And I'd encourage everybody to go. And you say it's a bad time now. You know what? You're still safer there than you are in the streets in America. You really are. And I wouldn't be afraid to go for anything. And when your plane comes in for a landing, they'll have some Jewish fighter jet guide you in next to the big airline, flying in just in case any missiles come. And that's pretty safe. And so I like that. But anyways, there he is. Now he's living in En-Gedi. And that En-Gedi, it was really a rough place, a tough place. A lot of wilderness and desert-like, and scrub trees everywhere, and hot, and just an uninhabitable place, really. And this became his home now for those years. And he was banished from the courts of Jerusalem because of Saul, and he was taken from his wife Michal, and then he makes this great statement here. And this statement he makes was in the midst of all those years on his trials. And he says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." Now, how do you do that in the midst of your trials? I don't know. Think of some of your really bad trials when you really got discouraged and you said, "Man, Lord, how can this be good?" And you say, "How can things be good?" Now the older saints, you've found out that God is always good, just like He said He is. And the younger ones are just learning that, and from trial and error. But for David here, he was going through this trial, and but the one thing about Engedi was, he was to be the next king, and instead of sending him to some liberal university to learn how to be a socialist, and an atheist, God put him on the backside of the desert. And I think that's just about the best place somebody can learn to be a good, righteous, godly king. And so he learned from all the trials he was going through how to rule a country. And he learned patience. He learned submission to the will of God. Well, that could be a hard lesson sometimes. Submission to God's will. Oh, I don't want to submit to His will. It's against my will. And we got somewhere along the line make up our minds that we're going to submit ourselves to the will of God because He's sovereign. And David was learning all that over there in Engedi. And so it was a good time of testing for him, and a good time for God to do a work in him. As God's preparing him to be a king, God's preparing each one of us here. The little kids, God's preparing them to be well-behaved teenagers, and they're learning all their lessons. And the teenagers are learning how to be young adults. And I can remember my mom telling me those things. I had no idea what she was talking about, no idea. But she'd grab you by your shirt tail and pull your face up to hers. She says, "Listen here, Buster." And that's when she was mad. She didn't call you by your full name. This time it was the Buster. And she'd start giving you a lecture. And I had no idea what she's talking about. But you couldn't forget it the way she did it, And then later, you start putting two together and say, "Oh, so this is what Mom was talking about. Man." And you find out you had a really good mom after all, huh? But even though you didn't know she was good or not, you always knew that she loved you, didn't you? Yeah, that's just one thing that's magical about it. But anyways, and then the young adults, God's preparing you for later in life, what He's got planned for you, and He's got some great plans for everybody, and whatever you're going to be, He wants you to be the best at it. So He gives you those trials and things that train you and get you to be what He wants you to be, and then for us older folks, He's getting us ready for that big next leap into the next realm, and where we're going to be seeing Him face to face, and I don't know if we're ever really ready, but He's doing that work, and because it's a shame after learning everything, you think you ought to start your life then, but that's when He takes you, huh? After you learn all that stuff. So personally, I think the best time in life is when you're a little kid and you don't know nothing. You don't know anything, and but that's just me. But anyways, so here, God's preparing us. Now, you think about these bad times that comes along in our lives, and I don't like bad times. For David, he was separated from his wife, and I'm sure David had plans, him and Micah, to raise a family. David said, "I'm part of the royal family now. I'm living in the courts of Jerusalem," and he was planning out his future. I'm going to be the next king, and what happens is he's thrust out of the palace. He's being chased, and they're trying to kill him. Well, that wasn't real happy for him, and he separated from his wife, and in fact, Saul even gave her to another man there until David unlawfully took her back when he became king. And young couples start out their lives, they get married, and boy, they sure have some high ideals, man. Yeah, we're going to have the best kids in the whole world. They're going to be saints, and they're going to be healthy. They're going to amount to something. Going to get a good job. Going to get a big house. Going to have a big car. And we're just going to just get all kind of dreams. And then what happens is, it doesn't take long. After a year or two, their dreams are crushed. Tragedies come. Things come along that changes their direction. And that big house they were looking at, that didn't work out. They got to move in that trailer over there. Or worse yet, move back home. And things happen like that. And so you wonder, how good is God then? Why did he let this happen? And where's that surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, man? It just all fled from me. And I'm David. I'm sure he said that. And he didn't just say it once, I bet. I think he said it over and over and over as he was hiding in that wilderness of En-Gedi and running from Saul. It's one thing to have trials, but to run every day for your life, to keep from getting slain, that's no good. That's no way to live. So there he is, going through those things. I remember in our home church, we had a young girl, a Christian girl, and she was looking to get married, looking for that right man. And it just seems like one wasn't coming along for a long time. And she was a real good girl. Everybody liked her. And finally she met a man. And he was part of our church. And he was a good man just like her. And everybody was real happy for them. So now they're starting out their life. And then they decided they want to raise a family. And so what happens is she couldn't get pregnant, She tried, and things just weren't working out, and everybody's a little bit sad because she wanted to have a child. So some years go by, and they're serving the Lord in the church and doing a good job. And then one day she finds out she's pregnant, and so she goes to the doctor, and of all things, she's got twin girls in her, and everybody was just real happy for them. And there's always somebody in the house of God that, when good news comes their way, you're just happy for them. And she was one of them. And then later on, when it was getting time to be having the child, she had some complications and some pain around, I guess, around the 8th month. I'm no doctor, and so they go to the emergency room that night, and they said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong. You just got some cramps here, and you'll be all right." And she goes home, and then later that night goes back to the hospital because they got worse, and she lost her twins. She lost her twins. Now is Romans 8:28 true all the time, that all things work together for good? It sure didn't seem like it then. Where's the goodness and mercies of God that follows you all the days of our life? And I wonder if maybe people have just interpreted that passage wrong. Maybe out of all the passages in the Bible, that one's not always true. What kind of a measuring stick do you use to see God working in lives that are just going haywire and everything's going wrong, and there's just so much tragedy? Someone loses a job, someone gets a bad doctor's report, and your dreams are just being crushed over and over and over, and you say, "Man, Lord, are you ever going to let up?" But you hear them preachers always tell you that there's always an answer for everything in the Scriptures. You just got to find it, And you know what? I found an answer to that in the Bible. I found an answering for God's measuring stick. And I want you to see it here. It's over here in Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. And this kind of answers this question, is God good all the time? And look what it says here in verse 8. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. As for the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than yours. And what God's saying is, look, you don't know everything like I know it. He knows the whole universe. He knows all the planets, and He knows the far-off places. He knows every stone on those planets. He made them. And He knows the microverse, where you go down into the cells of your body, and they say that goes on forever and ever, breaking down just like the universe goes outward, the microverse goes inward, and God knows all the places there. And here we are sandwiched in between all that on this old earth, and since God knows all those things, He knows the beginning and end of all things. He knows it all, and nothing catches Him by surprise. And since He's a God of love and goodness and mercy and kindness, He can only do what's right and what's good for us. He's not going to leave us out there in a jam and a mess or something like that. And so God, He is in control, and according to the Bible, all things do work together for good to them that truly love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. And you talk about our limited understanding. You parents, and you got your kids, they sure don't know a lot of things, do they? And you give them rules, like you got to eat your vegetables. Man, I used to hate eating those vegetables. I hated eating the Brussels sprouts and the asparagus and tomatoes and everything that was good for you. All I wanted to do was eat a bowl of jelly beans every day for supper, and I would have been happy. And then sugar pops, that's all I wanted to eat for breakfast. No, I had to eat eggs every day with leftovers from the night before, whether it's meat or potatoes. You had to eat all those. And not like these parents today, they let their kids eat whatever they want, and then they wonder why they're so unhealthy, and let them do what they want, and wonder why their boy's so effeminate and can't stand like a young man, because they just don't train them, and they don't get the old switch out, where the Bible says if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And these feminist mothers, they spoil their poor boys and make girly boys out, and they never amount to life because they weren't meant to be that way. And that's why you see a lot of this mess going on. But I'm glad that we got a God that really cares, and it's good when He gives you a good mother that is going to do what's right no matter what. And after I got saved, I started thinking about my mom. I said, I had a better mom than I thought I had after all, because she had to love like Christ. Jesus, He's going to do what's right for you, whether you like it or not, and because He cares about you and He knows the outcome. Whereas someone who, once cares about their own feelings more themselves, they're going to compromise just so you can be their buddy. But Jesus is not there to be my buddy. He's out there telling me what's right and wrong, and it's all for good. And my mom is that way. I remember her telling me, I am not your buddy, I am your mother. And I'm doing these things for your good, and someday you're going to thank me for them. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but I have to tell you, when I got older and started reading that Bible, I said, boy, I really had a good mother after all. And because she loved me even when I told her I didn't like her anymore, because I was mad. and that's the way the Lord is. And I can remember all those chores my mom would give us to do. Man, the other neighborhood kids, they didn't have to do chores. They just got to play all the time, and I had to do chores. They got to stay up late at night, stay out there till 10:30 at night. Here we are, 15, 16 years old, but my mom had control on us by then. Such control, we still listen. Had to be in bed at 9:30. Can you imagine that? And everybody else is out there in the neighborhoods running around playing. You can hear them, and she'd say, I don't care about those other kids. I'm thinking of your future, and I'm going to build in you strong bones. You're going to, that sleep is the building block of your body, and you're going to have your body build up right, and I'm putting meat and potatoes in you that builds muscle and strong bones, and your friends, their bones are going to be made out of fructose syrup and pop and candy, And when you're 35, you're going to be 10 times stronger and healthier than they are. And it was true. When they were 35, they were already physically 80 years old in a 35-year-old body. And then she talked about building character. Had no idea what that was. And I'm going to build character in you, and you're going to learn work ethics, and you're going to learn this and that. And I still didn't know what she was talking about. But, to this day, I'm not afraid of work. I know if you're going to get anywhere in this world, you have to put some time into it and work at it. But a lot of those buddies, they're on welfare because they're too lazy to work and too sorry to work and no character. And that's what God's doing in us. He's building godly character in us. And He's doing it. He's putting things in us that to make us strong. And He wants us to be servants. He wants us to be soldiers in the Lord. He doesn't want us to just be Christian welfare cases. And so somewhere along the line, got to let God have His way. And His way, He knows what's best. I'll never forget how when those James Bond movies first started coming out. And for guys, they talk, oh, yeah, man, he's doing all these things and shooting people. Oh, boy, that's the kind of movies guys like, we're not into those Hallmark things. And my buddy said, and you ought to see all the pretty girls in that movies, James Bond movies. So I wanted to go see one. That's back when it was like 65 cents for a movie, and that was a lot of money. And I wanted to see these pretty girls. But I said that with an innocent mind, I just figured pretty girls, And my mother wouldn't let me go. She says, no, that's not fit for a good man. That's not fit for a Catholic boy, because we were Catholics. And I said, yeah, but Mom, they're telling me about all these pretty girls in there. I'd sure like to see them. And she says, no, you're not allowed to see those James Bond movies. And if I find out, I know what's going to happen. And so, boy, what a mean mom. She's just making me do all these things. But and then that big question is where babies come from. And of course, my mother told us they come from the angels. Well, not just my mother, all the mothers in the neighborhood. That was just what they did in our town. Everybody grew up thinking that at our St. Francis Hospital on the 5th floor, there's angels there. And they bring these babies, and mothers go out and pick them out. And you're laughing, but let me tell you what my mother did one day. She said, Raymond, I'm going to be gone for 3 days. I'm going to be over at the hospital, and I'm going to bring you home a little brother. And she did. She spent 3 days picking out, looking at those babies, and she found one and brought home a little brother. And now, do you think she could have really explained to me where babies came from? Back in our days when we were innocent like you're supposed to be when you're a child. Do you think she could explain that to a boy? There's no way a boy can understand it. What, come out of that stomach? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. How are you going to get a baby out of that stomach, And I'm glad we all felt that way in the neighborhood. But you see, that's the way God is. There's things beyond our understanding. We just don't understand everything God's got planned. And His ways are higher than ours. And He knows what He's doing. And we just have to learn to trust Him when He says things. Like, for example, when He says that there's 3 persons in one Godhead. How can that be true? I don't understand that. Because the old idea, it's like an egg, shell, white part, and yolk. Well, there's 3 things that make up the egg, but those things aren't persons, So that doesn't explain it for me, and people try to explain it, and then the Muslims say there are no 3 persons in the Godhead. But Bible says there's 3 persons in the Godhead. I don't understand it, but I just have to take it by faith, don't I? Because God's ways are higher than mine, and His understandings are higher than mine, and He knows all things. So I just got to leave it with the Lord. And so many people, they just want to try to, when I was overseas a lot, and I was out there dealing with witnessing the folks, when you meet those Muslims, they would take you aside and say, look here. You talk about your God being three persons in one Godhead. That's the dumbest thing. He's one person, and he had a beginning. And you're Jesus Christ, and they get one of those false versions, where it says, "For God loved the world and gave His only Son," and they leave out the word "begotten" in those versions. All of them leave it out pretty much, and that begotten was important, wasn't it? I mean, God put every word in there just where He wants it. And it basically means to have had a pre-eternal existence before you became flesh and blood. That's what it means. But they don't see that because they don't have that. And they say, yeah, according to this, Jesus Christ had a beginning. And they want to make fun of you, calling Him God. But they want a religion that makes sense according to their human understanding. And that's a pretty small, shallow religion, isn't it? If God's going to be limited to your understanding and just be what you can conceive Him to be. But our God is so much greater than all that. And He's higher than the heavens. And His ways are higher. So I'm not going to limit what God is and who He is. I'm just going to have to admit I don't understand it all. I sure don't understand how the universe began. I still don't understand how He never had a beginning. Well, that's a real hard thing to understand. How you had no beginning. It hurts your brain just to try to think about it. But you know what? That's what He says. And I just got to make my mind. God means what He says, and I'll just leave it with the Lord. And so when it says all things work together for good, I just have to believe that all things work together for good, like the Bible says. And I don't understand sometimes some of these things that come along because they don't seem real good to me. But it does. Now, I may grumble and complain, but I have to say, well, Lord, I don't like this, and I wish I could have a break once in a while, and I wish this and that and this, but I guess you're in charge, and you know what's best. So I'll trust you after all. And that's what, that's what it says there in that Psalms there, 34. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed the man that trusteth Him. How do you taste? How do you see? By going through all these trials. He says that in Jeremiah 10:23, O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It's not a man that walketh to direct his steps. God's directing our steps. Every step we take. I don't understand that. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't understand it. You just have to take God at His word and believe that's what He's doing because He said so. The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. You mean, Lord, even losing those twin girls? Yes, they are. You mean, Lord, even messing up my bumper a couple of weeks ago at the campground and my nice new car? Yes. I don't understand, Lord. I don't know what I can learn from that. But you wouldn't believe what I did learn in the last couple of weeks. And I have to say, oh, the Lord, blessed is the Lord, just like David did. God's in control. And I think about Joseph when he was in Egypt. Man, his dad sent him on a chore that day to go out and check on his brethren. And he said, go find them, see where they're at. And he goes out there, just minding his own business. And what happens? He meets a certain man. Y'all ever wonder who that certain man was that he met? And that certain man knew where his brethren were because he couldn't find them. And this certain man, it just says a certain man. I wonder if it was an angel of the Lord or who it was, but it was a divine appointment because our steps are ordered of the Lord. And his steps were ordered to meet this certain man. And that certain man, if he didn't meet him, he wouldn't have had to go through the next 13 years of trials and tribulations. But that certain man was appointed by the Lord. Put him right in his path. He said, yeah, they're over yonder there. And he goes there, and when he got there, bam, they threw him in the pit. And boy, that must have been a heartbreak to get thrown in that pit, find out that they didn't like you after all. And you brothers and sisters, boy, can you imagine all of a sudden your brothers and sisters don't like you, and they want to destroy you, and some of them wanted to kill them? My goodness. But and then he gets thrown down into Egypt, into slavery, and put on the auction block and sold as merchandise, and the list just goes on of all the things he had to experience. But after 13 years, God blessed him and raised him up to be next to Pharaoh in the whole land of Egypt. And after all those trials, you know what he says? He says, the Lord meant it for good. And if anybody, he knew what this verse is all about tasting the goodness of the Lord. He learned to taste it by going through all those trials. And blessed is the man that trusteth in him. Our job is to just trust God. Trust him at his word. I don't understand it, Lord. It's beyond my understanding. But you said that you're good. And so when this thing comes along, I'll just trust you in it. And there's no chance happening in the will of God. Things don't happen chance by chance in a God who controls the whole universe. No, he controls everything and got everything under control, and things aren't mistakes. There's no such thing as bad luck, and it's all ordained of God. The world believes in bad luck, but we don't. We know that again, things are ordained of the Lord, and for David, there he is. You think about how Joseph, in the end, got rewarded. The goodness of God, it's without partiality. God doesn't show favoritism. He doesn't show revenge. He doesn't have motives like, I'm going to do this out of spite. I'm going to teach him a lesson. Because, just think, if you or me were God, we could really get even with anybody we wanted, huh? We could put a stumbling block in front of anybody. But God's not a man that he thinks like us. And boy, I'm glad for that. And I'm glad that he's much better than us and more gracious. And one thing, he's always thinking about our good, always thinking about the way he can be a blessing. And he doesn't want to chastise. He don't want to punish folks. He wants them to enjoy the goodness of God. And if we would just learn to trust God, we could enjoy that goodness. And for David, he's learning all these things as God's making him a king. And I want to stress this again. I mentioned it this morning, but let's take a look at God's attributes. His attributes. He's perfect in all his attributes, okay? God is perfect. And he's perfectly sinless. And he's perfectly just, perfectly holy. We got to remember these things because churches aren't teaching that anymore. They're teaching some other garbage. And so in his perfect justice means he can never make an exception when he judges somebody. So if they're guilty, he has to render the punishment for it. That's what perfect justice is all about. Perfect holiness doesn't know anything that's unholy and doesn't accept anything unholy and doesn't compromise. Compromises always lead to contamination. God never compromises in the Scriptures. He tells us to separate ourselves from the ungodly. He says separate ourselves from the unclean things and never compromise with them. That's socialism. That's social justice, which is of the devil. But no, we're to come out from among these things and be separate because that's the way God is. He's a perfectly holy God, just God, and a perfectly righteous God. He doesn't know any unrighteousness, and I'm just so glad for that. I'm glad I can count on him because if he made any exceptions, I couldn't trust in him. And then for the sinner, if they get to that white throne judgment, like I was talking about, and their name's not now in that book of life, they stand before the perfect justice and holiness and righteousness of God. And there's no forgiveness there, no mercy there. It's too late. And there they are in their sin, and that's why God has to condemn them to hell. And because even when I was first saved, I couldn't understand how God can send everybody to hell that isn't saved. But now I understand. I understand the Scriptures. And then for you and me that are saved, when we stand there, we can find forgiveness, because besides perfect justice and holiness and righteousness, we can stand before His perfect love, a love that's everlasting, beyond comprehension again, higher than our ways of thinking. And in His everlasting love, He paid that price. He paid that debt. So now you and me can stand there before the judgment, the judgment seat of Christ, because we won't be at the white throne judgment. And we stand there, and our sins are paid for, and what a blessing that is. But I think about Job, how he was severely tried, and he really was tried, my goodness. And he never had an understanding of what he was going through. He didn't know what the Scriptures said about him. You and me know, reading it centuries later. But Job didn't have an explanation for all that he went through. You know how you always say, "Why me, Lord? Why me?" No, he never got an explanation. A lot of these biblical characters didn't get explanations for what they were going through. They just had to go through it. And I like that famous statement that Job made, and I've made it myself, like to be my statement at times. And that's where he said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Remember that verse? Man, because it felt like he was being slain as he went through all that. And he says, "So though he slay me, yet I'll trust him. I'll trust him." And I'm sure, Pastor, you said that many times, and I've made a statement one time. I said, "Well, Lord, like Job, I want to make a little further statement. I want to say, though you slay me, I'm still going to serve you," because I wanted to serve the Lord. I didn't know how, never knew how. I never said I was called to be a pastor or anything. I just knew I wanted to serve God with all my heart. And I tell you, and you older folks know, we've all had our share of being slain, haven't we? And it was all for good. And oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. He knows what He's doing. And it all works together for good. And it's really funny how after you've been tried, you can make the statement that God was good in all this, and it's just that's the way it works out, and again, like the younger folks are just learning all these things, but God's in control, and I think that the goodness of God, it's unsearchable. There's no end to it, and you don't know where it begins, but it's there. And I think about the multitude of His mercies. They're new every morning and fresh. His compassions, they fail not, never fail. And this is what David was learning, and this is what God wants you to learn as you go through the trials of life. And then when you get older, you figure, well, Lord, I should have learned it all by now. Is it time to get a break? Nah, it just keeps going on. And but again, I thank God for His mercies, and thank God that keeps His word, and as a child, things are beyond my understanding, and I sure didn't understand my mom and her ways, and took her for being mean, and she knew she couldn't explain things for me. But as a good mother, she knew I was going to grow up, and I'd find out after all, and I'd start remembering all the things she'd done and how they were good for me. She knew that. But these young mothers today, my goodness, they want to cave in and be their child's buddy and give in to them and never discipline them. If a child grows up never getting disciplined, how's he going to learn discipline from the Lord? How's he going to learn chastisement from God? And it's so important, because like as a child, we're the only God they have up until a certain age. And so, you remember the time when your dad was the smartest dad in the whole world? Remember that? and Mom was the smartest mom in the whole world. And Dad was not only the smartest dad in the world, he was the strongest man. Yeah, and I used to ask him about Samson, you know, and oh yeah, yeah. And oh, those are some good days. I can remember their first time, both of them let me down. Yeah. Like, for example, my mom, I could always count on her to keep my secrets. So I told her about the neighbor kid that broke in this guy's garage that sold cigarettes. He had packages and crates of cigarettes, and old Scott, he just got in there and stole a bunch of them. And then he smoked them, you know. And so I said, well, Mom, if I tell you this, you promise not to tell anybody, because I don't want to get in trouble with Scott. He's my buddy, you know. So I told her, and sure enough, I caught Mom on the phone talking to his mother. And I'm telling you, I was so let down. I didn't think my mother could give you her word and break it. I didn't. And then the time my dad let me down, you know, I had this job, and I was a janitor at a business college after hours, after school hours. So I'd go down there about 6 o'clock in the evenings, and I'd work for 3 hours, sweeping the floors and straightening up the desk and picking up papers and emptying out the trash. And I was getting below minimum wage, but I didn't care. You know, I was probably getting $1.80 an hour, and I think it was about $2.50 an hour was the minimum wage then, because I was going to work for 7 months and make $60. And for $60, I could buy a motorbike. A friend had a motorbike I could buy. Oh, guys, isn't that the greatest thing to have when you're 15 years old? And I'm working there, and my dad, you know, always wanting to keep up the Jones. He finds out what I'm getting paid. He says, no, I can't let you work there. I said, oh, Dad, I want to make that money for this and that. And he said, well, here's what you do. You just tell him that you're not going to work for him anymore because you're not getting enough money, and you tell him that you want a raise. I said, oh, Dad, he'll fire me. He said, no, he won't fire you. He needs you, and you just do it. And if he says no, you just kind of straighten up and walk out like a man, and he'll call you back. So I did that, and Mr. Lyons, you know, he says, okay, then I'm sorry to lose you. And I said, I'm going to leave, and I'm going out there. I said, I'm leaving now. And I walked down the hall, walked home crying. I lost my job. And, oh, man. You know, I don't mind working for like $1.80 an hour when the minimum wage is $2.50 if I'm going to make the money to buy a dream, you know, a motorbike. You know, what's greater than a motorbike when you're 15, 14? So anyways, but you know what? God doesn't let you down, does he? He never lets you down. And you can count on him. You can count on his word. Boy, just think about what it was like for Lazarus when he was dying. And Mary and Martha come to Jesus, and our brother's dying, and Jesus would stop at Lazarus' house many times on his journeys, and there he'd have a missions apartment there waiting for him, so one day Mary comes by and says, Jesus, your friend Lazarus is dying, and he's near death. And what did Jesus say? This isn't unto death. Don't worry about it. So she left saying, well, he'll take care of it. He doesn't lie. He's the Son of God. And all of a sudden, 4 days go by, and Lazarus finally dies, you know, and then Jesus comes along, and Mary says, man, Lord, it's good to see you, but you're a little too late. He's been dead now. And he says, don't worry, I'll raise him up. And he says, and she says, yeah, I know you're the resurrection of life, and you're going to raise him up on the last day. And Jesus says, no, I am life itself. And he raised them up, didn't he? Raised them up. Now let me ask you this. When Lazarus died, you think Mary and Martha and them are saying, surely God isn't good all the time. Surely Romans 8:28 isn't true all the time. Do you think they had some doubts? I mean, the Lord let them down, and they missed that opportunity. And he's in the ground 4 days stinking. I mean, I don't know. How can you bring life back into something like that, already decomposing? And Jesus, they didn't understand when Jesus said, I am life. I am life. So, but I tell you what, after Jesus raised him from the dead, I think that every time Jesus preached, out of all the people listening, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus got more out of the sermons than anybody else. And I think Lazarus would tell you today, hey, it was for good. It really was. You know, it wasn't good dying, but to be raised back to life again, man, what a blessing. What an experience. That's better than a motorbike, huh? And so, but that day, you know, back when David was running from Saul, and he went to that cave of Engedi, and things were rough and tough. It was a wilderness and dry and parched, and running all those days, and he was tired of running for his life. Didn't understand God's working and everything, but somewhere along the line, God got a hold of his heart, and he said, you know, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. And he said that before he was delivered. And in our lives, we may have delays and detours and dreams crushed and finances lost, and you may lose your health. But you know, God's doing a work in you, preparing you to be a king. And the way I feel, I should be a great king someday. but anyways, you'll be tried, broken, and proven, but God's in control. And he's just getting you ready for the next step. So let's just bow our heads and close our eyes. And while your heads are bowed and your eyes are closed, you know, while God's out there working on us so that we can taste the goodness of God rather than just know about it, our responsibility is to just walk by faith. He tells us over and over that we live by faith and not by sight. We walk by faith and not by sight. Faith tells me that I can't understand the things of God that are beyond our understanding, but by faith I'll accept that they're real. We don't know what heaven's really like. We just got some human ideas in our own minds, but it's going to be beyond our human experience, heaven. And you know, our responsibility is just live a life by faith and trust God that He doesn't lie. And learn to submit to His sovereignty in your life. God's in control. And He really does know what's best. And maybe there's somebody here tonight, you're still not a born-again Christian. You've never got that settled completely. And I wouldn't want you to leave here being unsaved. And maybe somebody here say, Brother Ray, would you pray for me? I'm still not sure about my salvation. Because you're missing out on the blessings of God. Anybody like that? And for the rest of you, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but listen, if God's spoken to your heart this afternoon, and He brought something up to you that's challenged you or convicted you or whatever, you know, a good way to deal with that thing is at the altar. It's always a good place to deal with things. And if you put it off, that anointing is going to be a lot less. Until by the time you get home, you won't have that anointing anymore, and you'll turn on the football game and who knows what. The time to deal with things is when God speaks to your heart.